It's an interesting topic for me. I've been working with Silverlight for quite a while now, and working on a book in which a lot of this content comes from. And I asked Scott to come with me today to demo this because he's done a lot of work for me, and we've done a lot of work together building these Silverlight applications and parts and extensions, and it's just been a really good time. And so since we have a lot to talk about, we have I don't know, what would you say, Scott, 150 slides to get through?
There was like 150, but last night, just to cover the last topic, I had to put in like 30 or 40 more.
So we got lots of slides. How many people like slides?
You guys want that, right? Lots of slides?
No hands? This is tech ed. All right, so, okay, instead what we'll do is, how about we do no slides? All right. So we actually have about, we did a no slides session where we went for 4 hours of solid demos. But we only have 75 minutes, so we'll try to fill that with as many as we can squeeze in.
Yeah, but we're the last session, so we could like order pizza and keep going.
That would be cool.
Right?
I got a credit card. So the demos are going to be really exciting, and so you're going to see lots of things, and you'll see lots of interesting techniques that you won't have seen before. And so hopefully you take away some of these techniques and examples and go back and use them in your own environment and stuff. And so I think we'll just get started. My name is Paul Stubbs. I'm a SharePoint technical evangelist in Redmond. I focus on SharePoint, phone and SharePoint, cloud and SharePoint, Silverlight and SharePoint, HTML and SharePoint, right? So everything around the SharePoint universe is really what my realm is. And today I have with me Scott Hillier, who let him introduce.
I'm a SharePoint MVP, and my world revolves around SharePoint too. I really don't do anything else but SharePoint all day long. If you can develop it in SharePoint, I've probably done it, and I think that probably summarizes what you said about your areas as well.
Yeah.
So Paul and I spend our days writing code inside of SharePoint.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time passing back emails going, do you know how to do this?
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you know how to do
this?
this?
This looks broken.
Okay, so let's get started. So we're going to switch over to my machine. First thing we're going to kind of do is kind of level set everybody real quick to show you how to build a Silverlight web part. And then the rest of the demos are going to be really just the inner workings of those Silverlight web parts and how to use them to access data on your site. So first thing I want to do is that we built this really cool Silverlight web part extension for Visual Studio, and that's what I want to show you briefly how to use. First, go to your favorite search engine like Bing and look up the VS Gallery. Once you're in the VS Gallery, you can search for SharePoint and Silverlight. And, did I spell that right? And so here's the SharePoint and Silverlight web part down here. Sorry, I'm having click issues. Where did it go?
It's only because you're in front of a group, right?
It's gone.
They took it down. It's that bad.
Just there. Didn't you see me click on it? No, I don't want to have. Well, let me get back to this one. Once you install it, what happens in Visual Studio is that it adds an extension here to your Visual Studio, which is your web part extension for Silverlight. And it's just a simple V6 extension, so it's very easy to install. You just double-click on the file and install it. It does require the Power Tools as a prereq, so download the Power Tools first, which is another extension out there, and do that. But once you do that, the way it works is that you start with a Silverlight application. So in this case, I have a Silverlight application that's just a simple data grid. And this is just a normal Silverlight project that you would create. Open the form for you. It's just a data grid. It has paging. It shows you how to do some cool client object model paging back and forth, data binding in the grid. But what I want to do is show you how do we get this into SharePoint. And the way you do it is I need to add a SharePoint project so that I can deploy this. So we'll come in here and add new project. I'll just add an empty SharePoint project. So we'll click OK. We'll deploy it to the sandbox because that's where most of your code should go anyway for security. Makes it nice and easy and fast as a developer.
Yeah, and pretty much everything we're doing in this session runs as a sandbox solution. So this is a great pattern to follow for deploying solutions in SharePoint that help you with farm stability.
A couple of things that I do just as habits, not strictly required, is I always set Silverlight debugging on my SharePoint project. So right down here, you just turn that on so I can do debugging. Not that my code has bugs, but just in case. Come here and close this. I set the SharePoint project to be the startup project so that when I hit F5, it'll deploy. And so at this point, I haven't used the extension yet. I have a SharePoint project and I have a Silverlight project. Now the goal is I need to basically wire them together so that my SharePoint project can deploy my Silverlight project. And the way you do that with the extension is you just right-click, choose Add New Item, and now at the bottom we have a Silverlight web part extension that's there. And so since I only have one Silverlight project in my solution, it knows to just automatically wire that one up together, and it just connects the two together. It copies the web part link into my SharePoint project. It generates a web part so that I can see the Silverlight application in that web part. And it generates a test harness page that hosts that web part on that page so that when I'm done, we can see that I have the deployment. It's going to go into the master pages gallery. I have my test page. It'll go in the site pages collection. And I actually have the web part itself, which will get deployed. Now, I won't talk about this too much in detail. There's a video on Channel 9 you can watch where I go into more detail. But because we have so much to show, I'll just kind of quickly show you how this works. And then we just hit F5 to run it. It packages up the project. It compiles it. It deploys the WSP to SharePoint. It activates the WSP in SharePoint. Then it starts the test harness, which in this case is your browser, and attaches the debugger to it.
Yeah, I mean, the point of this is that it makes it ridiculously easy to write Silverlight applications that run in SharePoint. All the stuff that was tough before is now done for you. I mean, it's like baking cookies.
That easy. And so now I have the test harness page here, which actually has the Silverlight application that we just built. And the Silverlight application automatically data binds to the list. And so now I have my list, my Silverlight application in there. So it's just drop dead simple, right? Now, the other one we have as well, so that leverages the built-in Silverlight web part, which ships in SharePoint. But if I wanted to do a custom one, I can just delete that one. Come in here and do Add New Item, Custom Silverlight web part. Now, the difference between the built-in one and the custom one is that the custom one uses a visual sandbox web part to host the Silverlight object tag. And the advantages of that, it allows you to do some customizations around the page that you might not have been able to do because of the built-in one, right? This gives you the chance. So you can see here, this is just a standard ASCX control. We have some script in there, and here's our Silverlight control that gets hosted on there. And so we could just run this at this point. But for example, I can come in here and add some additional stuff because it's just my page. So I'll just add a div tag in here, and we'll give it an ID. We'll call it something like Silverlight div. And now when I run this, the experience is going to be, at this point, the same as we're using the built-in web part. But the built-in web part has some limitations, like there's a hard-coded 5-second timeout. So your apps have to be fairly small to run within that one. This one gives you the freedom to move around. And so now we run this. The test harness page was created for us automatically. The debugger's attached, and so on. The difference now is that I have the div tag that I added, and I have code in this application that will automatically use the HTML bridge to copy the name into that div tag. So as I click on someone's name, it gets put out here on the page just as normal HTML that you could do whatever you want to do with. And so as I click around, we see the interaction between the Silverlight application and the web page all built in with the part, and it just makes it super easy.
So my hosting web part, I can put all kinds of stuff on it that just isn't there with the out-of-the-box.
JavaScript, jQuery, anything you need to wrap around your Silverlight app.
It's cool.
So
good. Are we moving on? All right, so now everybody knows how to develop Silverlight applications in SharePoint. So now what we can do, since you guys are all experts on that, is we can just move on to showing you some techniques. So what we really want to do is just show you some different techniques that you can use with Silverlight in the SharePoint world. And so the first one that I'm going to show you is we're going to take a look at the use of OData. So OData is, sometimes you'll hear people talk about RESTful interfaces, right? So SharePoint has this RESTful interface that it provides to lists. And the idea behind REST is that REST is a way of issuing a request that's based all on a URI, right? So I always think it's interesting. If I say to developers, if I say, oh, I want you to go write some code that brings me back some data from a list, inside of everybody's mind, what you kind of think about is this function signature where I pass a value in, and then the function operates, and then there's a value that returns. Okay? And we have a way of doing that in web services, right? That's when we use SOAP, right? The Simple Object Access Protocol, and we use a remote procedure call. And that's kind of the way everybody's oriented around doing things. They think about it that way. What REST brings to the table, though, is a way of requesting this data that's based on the construction of the URI itself. And so when somebody says that to you, at first you're kind of like, I'm not sure I understand what that means. But the reality is that you do it every day, all the time. So when you type a URL into a browser, right, and you ask for a web page, you're not calling the show page method and passing in an argument, right? You send this URL, which in and of itself says exactly what you want. And that's what SharePoint does for us for lists. It exposes this OData, this RESTful interface. And I've just got some examples of that here. Let's take a quick look just so we understand. First of all, we're driving everything off of this contacts list right here. So it's just a list of contacts. There's a bunch of contacts in it that we populated, but there's nothing special about this. Straight out of the box contact list. And then if I go to this other list where I have some links, I can come up here and click on the first one, which says all lists. And you can see it definitely brings back some data, but this becomes really instructive if we just grab the URL and sort of put it up here in Notepad. And you can see that the first part of the URL is the site, so this is all to the site. And then underscore VTI bin list data SVC. It's list data SVC that implements this RESTful interface for us. And we can take this further by saying, okay, well, let's take a look at the contacts list. So this URL right here brings back items from the contacts list, and if we compare it to the one that I just showed you, you can see that all I do is put on the end of it contacts, and you can do this with any of the lists in the site, and then the information that's returned is all of the items inside the contact list.
Now that's case sensitive, right?
Yeah, it's all case sensitive, and in fact, if you look at the data returned, right, it actually tells you what the URI is for the next thing. So here you see I've got it highlighted. And if I was interested in the first item in the list, I could simply come up here to the URI and say, okay, now, give me the first item like that, okay? So it gets even better, though, because we have some more advanced capabilities. So for example, I'll just show you a quick example of something more advanced. Here's one that says, only bring me back last names that start with the letter A. So that's not an uncommon thing to ask about a set of contacts. And if we take a look at that URI, you can see here that I've got this filter on the end of it that says where the last name starts with A. So this is pretty cool. You think you can see how you format this to get things back. But, we're not going to tell our end users, hey, I'm going to teach you this syntax, right? And then you can just, run your own queries in the browser. Thank you very much. It doesn't work like that. So what we want to do is use this in a solution. And the way that we do it is that if we create a Silverlight solution, we can set a reference to list data SVC, and then it's going to create a proxy for us, and that proxy is going to be a type-safe interface so that we can just write some code and bring back that data. And so here we can see the complete solution for that.
Now the thing that I like about this REST and the OData in SharePoint is that it's not SharePoint OData, right? It's the same OData that you use on SQL Azure and Data Marketplace and Netflix and all the other sites that are doing, right? It's not a special version of OData for SharePoint.
Yeah, so it's cross-platform, right? So this is the ultimate cross-platform thing, because if you have a client that can create a URI and what client can't, then you can make requests of SharePoint to get back data and present it. And you can see that's exactly what we're doing here with this particular Silverlight application. So this is using that OData interface. And again, the key here, and I'll show you in the code, is that once you set a reference to it, you get a strongly typed interface. So in code, you're just asking to get things back, and they're coming to you as objects that you can easily render. Just to show you some of the capabilities here, we can come in and do a search, so I can just simply type in and it'll do a filter for me, search the contacts. If I take it out of there, then it'll go back to giving me everything. The other thing that you'll see down here at the bottom is we're actually caching the data. So as we're talking across the wire, right, one of the things we're really concerned about is how much chatter we're generating back and forth across the wire, and then how much data we're bringing back, right? So we never want to be in that situation where you're trying to shove an elephant down a snake, right? So we're trying to...
That's quite an image.
Yeah, you like that?
Yeah.
So what we're doing is just take it a little bit at a time, and if you look down here at the bottom, you can see I've got the first page in cache, and we've made 4 calls to list data SVC. If I click to go to the next page, so I'm paging here, you'll see that it now says I've got 2 pages in cache, and indeed I've made 5 calls to list data SVC. But if I back up, you'll see that I'm really just pulling the data from cache now, and you can see I'm not making any additional calls to list data SVC. So the idea is just to take that data that you need, keep the chatter down, keep the amount of data moving back and forth small. All right, so let's take a quick tour of the code here so I can show you how it's done. Really, this is all enabled by setting a service reference inside the code. So this service reference goes right to list data SVC at the site that you care about. When you move to different environments like your QA or production environment, you can simply in code change the URL that you're pointing to. List data SVC is one of those things that's available every single site that you have in SharePoint. And then what happens is, and I'm just going to jump into some spots in the code here. I've got some bookmarks to make it easy for us. And what happens here is that when you do this, what you're going to get is what's called an observable collection. So this collection right here called data service collection is an observable collection, and this is one of the things we get from setting that reference and getting this type-safe proxy set for us. And the key thing about the observable collection is that what it does is it keeps track of all of the adds, updates, and deletes that you're performing inside of the operation, and then it's going to be able, inside of the application, and then it's going to be able to do updates back. So once we have that collection, here's the actual point at which the querying begins. So you can see, if you'll take a look up here, that the first thing we do is check to see whether or not the particular page number we care about is in cache. And the cache is a pretty simple setup. It's just a dictionary that keeps the data as it comes in so that we can grab it from cache if we have it already. But the basic stuff begins right here, where you can see that I'm running a link query. So we go ahead and looking for contacts item. So notice this type safety, right? So I'm able to run this query in this type safe way, and then you can see that what it does is it says from contact in contacts. It also says to include the total count. This is something you may not have seen before, even if you're used to working with link or OData, is that you can go ahead and bring back this one page of data, but then you can say, okay, include total with it so that I know what's going on with the total size. And then the classic way of link of getting a page is to use the skip and then take method, the skip and then take, which allows you to skip a certain number and then grab the ones that you want for just the page. And you can see we've got the page number and the page size here. So that's the basic link query that we're able to run against OData. And then just like I showed you in the examples of creating URIs, we can also add those additional things to the end of the URI. In this case, you can see we're doing an order by and a filter here. So this allows me to put those additional things on at the end. And then what I can do is just say to add this query option. And now it's like formulating that complete URI that I was showing you inside the browser.
That looks easy, but I mean, it's no camel.
Yeah, it's no. Thank God for that, huh? That's right. Real men ride camel. All right, so then what happens is after we get this thing all done, now here's another thing you may not have seen if you're doing, even if you're familiar with some of the OData stuff that's running around out there. I'm doing a begin execute now, which is going to execute that query that we just set up, but we're going to do it asynchronously. We're going to do it asynchronously. One of the key things about really all Silverlight development, right, is it needs to call web services asynchronously. And so you can see we've set it up here to do the async call. And then here we just have delegates that are essentially the functions that are going to get executed when the query is executed and completed. And so if you come down here, you can see inside the code.
Now it's interesting in this code, the way doing these inline delegates is kind of interesting because it's a little bit harder to follow if you're debugging, because once you hit that spot, the next line of code isn't that block. It goes off and does whatever it was doing.
That's right.
But readability, you can just read your code like it was a functional and not asynchronous. And also by doing it this way, any variables you had set within that scope or that function are still valid inside of the delegate. So you don't have to create class level variables to pass to the returning async call by doing this way as well. So
yeah, we certainly could have set up separate functions and said run this function when the query is complete, but the readability here is much, much better than it is with all those separate functions.
And we went back and forth when we wrote the book about like which way is better, and there's trade-offs for both, and so in the book we kind of mixed them up a little bit. And used them
well, in fact, that you mentioned that, a lot of the stuff that we're doing here is coming from a book that Paul is working on, and before I forget to do it, I want to make sure that I thank Bob German, who's Paul's co-author and did a lot of the work for this talk, so I want to make sure I call that out before we go.
And all of this code is available online, so as soon as you get done with this session, you can download all this code and run it. So. All
right, so that's good. So then you can see there we're running the query. Now let's see, next place to stop here is just the add, update, delete type operations. So here we just have the buttons to click on. So, I can come in here. We got full CRUD operations. If I come up here and I say, let's do a search for Gustavo there, I can come in and put an S on Gustavo's name and just save that out. Okay? So you can see we've got full CRUD operations going, and this is just the code that allows that to happen. Now remember, we had this observable collection, right? So as we're going through, it's keeping track of all these things, and you can see the add is pretty simple. Just a few lines of code there. Delete as well, pretty simple. And then you do the save changes, which saves all of those observed operations back again. And notice that when I do the save changes, once again, we're doing that asynchronously and following that same pattern that says, okay, take everything we've got, send it back asynchronously, and then here's that message box that you saw floating around.
And this one's just a slight variation on that pattern because we're passing 2 parameters to our delegate where the other pattern didn't pass any parameters. So just kind of another example of how you can pass parameters even to the delegates in line.
So the takeaway on this is that OData and the RESTful interface and these types of patterns are really important to you beyond just being able to query a list like we've done here. Many, many, many services now are moving towards this RESTful model. There's all kinds of public services available on the internet that also use this model. And so you have a bunch of interesting scenarios that come up where you can write Silverlight applications that actually go get flight information or Bing Map information or use MusicBrainz to download album information, all kinds of stuff like that using exactly this same pattern.
Yeah, good.
Good? Okay, over to you, Paul. Next one.
Cool. So just to recap that web page does exist, we can see that here's the page where you would download that add-in I showed you earlier. And so just do, like I said, go to Bing, search for VS Gallery, then search for Silverlight and SharePoint, and it's like the second hit on that list. Just click on it. It has, you can click to download here, and then it basically has the instructions on what to do. Obviously, one of the first things here is to install the prereq. If you don't, you'll get an exception message, but it's fairly obvious. Also, you can click here, which is a video I did with John Popper on Silverlight, and so you can basically watch in detail the demo I showed you this morning, which is really brief, but you can watch this in more detail out there as well for the video. So those are some tips. So now I want to show you another example. Scott showed you how to use the OData feed. What I want to show you how to do is use the client object model. Now the client object model is one of 3 new client object models that shipped with SharePoint. One for the .NET CLR, so if you're writing console applications, WinForms, WPF, or whatever, PowerShell, you would use that one. There's the Silverlight version, which is what I'm going to show you. And then there's a JavaScript version, so if you're doing jQuery or JavaScript on your page, you could use that. But the client object model gives you capabilities to do data like you saw in OData, but it also gives you more capabilities to do other things like create web parts and sites and other things. And basically, the client object model covers everything that's in the Microsoft.SharePoint.dll. So all the all the namespaces and classes in that assembly are pretty much represented by the client object model. And so in this case, what I want to do is I have a little application that I wrote that uses the webcam on my computer, and we're going to take that image and we're going to capture it using the client object model, upload that image to a document library. Then we're going to generate a wiki page on the fly and insert a web part with that image into that wiki page that we create on the fly, right? So
That's a lot. Better get started.
so first thing we'll do is we'll tell Silverlight we want to use the camera, and it asks me. So you have to say yes, so it doesn't just automatically go into stalker mode. So then we can capture, and of course we'll start with my favorite subject. Oh, there we go.
Awesome. That looks great. How about me?
Okay, I got another webcam here. We'll try that one. So let's plug this other one in here and see what happens. So what we'll do is we'll capture. So I detect I've got two, so I'll capture it. So here we go. This is looking good now.
Now what the heck's that?
What?
That's a makeover for me.
This is twice as good. All right, okay. I got one more webcam. We'll plug in one more here. Let's see if we can plug in one more. All right, so now I got three. And we'll capture them so you don't feel left out.
There we go.
You know, so there you go. How's that? You feel better?
Thing of beauty.
Well, I have some other effects here. Let's see if we can fire some things up here. I don't know if, we'll see if this works or not here. Sometimes, you know, just so I can look good.
That's, I don't know if that's an Atlanta thing. It's close.
I don't know if we
Like
can
a Dallas thing.
get you on this one or not here. Let's try this again. See if we can get everybody on the page at the same time. Okay, there we go. You're good. We fire it up here. There we go. Let's open these up here. We'll get a, how about McEnroe? Is anybody from the 80s?
There you go. That's some 80s hair right there.
Give John a little look here with some more hair. How's that?
Thanks. That the meat cake.
Little Lady Gaga.
There you go. Wait, that's supposed to be after the session. Nobody's supposed to know about that.
So what we can do is, you know, I click the capture button here, and what happens is if we come back to our site, let me go back up to the site here. If we come back to the site, we can see that, hopefully the site refreshes, that we've saved the image. The image has been uploaded. So I converted it to a PNG on the fly, uploaded that image to SharePoint.
That's going to be on Twitter.
And then if we come here, I've generated on the fly a wiki page, and that wiki page has that image as a web part inserted onto that wiki page.
I know I'm going to see that again.
Right? And so it seems fairly simple, right? It seems fairly basic, but the problem is that we have a couple of issues that we have to solve. We have to solve how do we convert the PNG or to convert anything out of Silverlight. That's the first issue. We upload. That's fairly basic to upload, and I'll show you all this code. The problem is generating the wiki page, because the wiki pages are really, really complicated in SharePoint. Has anybody done any wiki page development? So the way the wiki page is structured, like normally you have a page in SharePoint, and it's a web part page, and it has web part zones, and you put web parts in those web part zones, right? That's not the wiki page. The wiki page is I can type anywhere, and I can put web parts anywhere in that page. They can go in line with text, and they can go anywhere, right? Just like an image on a normal page.
Yeah.
Well, the way that works is that the wiki page is actually a single field on your SharePoint page. On the wiki page is actually a single wiki field that contains all of the HTML to render that wiki page. But then how do I put a web part into that text? It's just text. How do I insert a web part? Well, the web parts are actually in a hidden web part zone. At the bottom of the wiki page, it's actually a hidden web part zone. And your web part is inserted into the hidden web part zone. and then a GUID reference to that hidden web part is inserted into the HTML of the wiki. Now, all this is done automatically for you. When you type and create a new wiki page in SharePoint, it just happens and you don't even realize it's happening. But as a developer, programmatically doing this is very challenging, right? And that's the thing that we had to do. So,
but we want to be able to do it because it gives it a lot more flexibility.
It's a lot of power, right? You can create these pages on the fly. So I'll close this if you're tired of looking at yourself. So here's the application that I have here. So it's just a basic page. We have a couple buttons to capture the device and so on and so forth here. Let's look at the code behind for this. Now what I do is I create a rectangle to hold all the webcams. And this is just basic standard Silverlight webcam stuff, nothing SharePoint-y at this point. We're going to then come down here and we capture the video devices. Now you can think of a video device in Silverlight like a Windows media player, right? In essence, that's the way it is conceptually. And so we capture how many of those things are active, and we keep that in a collection here, and then I just iterate through them to basically turn them on and play and stop and capture, right? So that's how it works here. So think of them as like little media players inside your Silverlight app, and you can grab them here through the get all available capture devices API that's built into Silverlight. And then once you have that, what you want to do now is take a snapshot and upload the image to SharePoint. And the way I've done that is I've take a writable bitmap object, grabbing the rectangle that contains all of those images, and now I call this method write to SharePoint off of my built-in writable bitmap class that ships out of SharePoint, ships out of Visual Studio. But what I was able to do is I was able to extend that built-in class with my own method write to SharePoint. And the way you do that is you can just create an extension here that does write to SharePoint. And so the way you create .NET extensions is basically just create a static class that has a method of the type you want to override or extend. So in this case, I'm extending the built-in writable bitmap class with another method that's my own method, right? So that developers that are going to use this application can now it feels like it's part of the application and makes it very easy.
And that technique is beyond what you're doing. That's something that developers do day to day.
That's right.
Become a really common thing to extend existing classes without having to inherit from them.
Yep, nothing special SharePoint yet. Then what I do is that there aren't any built-in encoders that ship with Silverlight. So you have to get some third-party encoder. Well, up on CodePlex, there's a third-party encoding stream, PNG encoder, that allows me to encode these bitmap images. So that's what I use here. I grab the encoder, I call their encode method, which converts those images into a PNG stream. Now here's where SharePoint starts. Now I get a reference to SharePoint at this point. I get a reference to the list that I want to upload that object to. In this case, it's the Shared Documents library. Once I have that, I can create a file creation object, which is basically a definition of a file. Set some properties on that, like what I'm going to do, the actual content. And then I can set the name of it, and then I just add it to the actual collection.
And so what's so cool about this is that this is really all client-side stuff. So that's why this can be a sandbox solution. It doesn't need to be installed in the GAC.
Office 365.
So Office 365 will do it. So, you care about these techniques because increasingly we're getting less and less access to things like the GAC, right? So people are much more concerned about farm stability and kind of forcing us to think about our SharePoint solutions this way.
Yeah, right. And so here I do the kind of traditional callback instead of the inline delegate. So you can see I'm calling this and I call the next method here. So when I call that and create the actual file, so now I've created the bitmap, the PNG up on the server. Now I need to create the wiki page. So the first thing I want to do is, since I run this demo over and over again, I want to make sure that there's not already a wiki page out there so I don't overwrite it because it'll throw an exception. But if there's already a page, just delete it. And if there's not a page, great. Well, I don't want to have to call the server to say, hey, do you have a page out there already? And then come back and say yes or no. Okay, then delete it, and then no, right? I'll just say, go do that on the server. And in this case, what I can use is these exception scopes. And this is basically server-side exception handling using the client object model. So I'm basically writing a program that actually gets run on the server. So I go up there and say, hey, try to delete the page, and if you have an exception, just continue. Don't even worry about it. And if you don't have exception, then go ahead and delete the object that's out there. And so this goes out and executes that on the server and never comes back until it's done, and in which case either it was there or it wasn't, the page has been deleted.
So this is another, I think, extremely important pattern, because what you have to think about now is that I'm not constantly connected to the server, so I'm not necessarily sure what the state is when I go to run my code and whether my code will be valid. So I have to think through a lot of different edge cases conceivably before I ask it to do something for me.
That's right, yeah. And again, the client object model is designed to be efficient, so it wants to minimize how much we call the server and how much stuff we send to the server.
Yeah, it's that old elephant and snake thing again, right?
So, okay, so now what I want to do is I actually want to create a wiki page. And so I get a reference to the site pages collection, and using the files.add, in this case it's an overload, which is add template file, telling it I want to create a wiki page template. And then what I do is I give it a name and I actually say go do that by calling load. And that actually executes that on the server and creates the page. Now what happens is that when I create this page, it's hard to explain here because the way this works is different than what you experience when you use the designer. Because when you go into SharePoint, say file new wiki, it does all this at one time really fast, and you don't realize this is happening. But when I created this page like this, it doesn't actually build the wiki field for me. The wiki field is empty at this point, so the page doesn't really work, even though it's created the template. It's kind of unfortunate that they didn't put that all in the template. Did you have a question down front?
I noticed you did the delete pattern, but not on the page, but not on the JPEG download. Did I just miss that?
Here, when I upload it here? So this calls this method? Yeah, it just works. Yeah. So when we come back, so now I've created the wiki page up there, and now what I need to do is I have basically an empty wiki page. I actually need to create a web part, which is going to be the image viewer web part, and I need to stick that web part into that hidden web part zone, right? That's the next kind of task. And so here what I do is I create a new DWP file, which is a SharePoint web part definition file. And the easiest way is to just create a template. You go create an image web part, go onto SharePoint, right click on it and choose export web part. When you choose export web part in SharePoint, it creates this file for you. So I just copied that file into my Visual Studio project, and then I need to fix up the path to the image. So I come down here to the path to the image, and I actually just put a replacement variable in here. So I can use this as a template. And so that's all I'm doing here is I do just a basic string format on that text file in my project and replace that /0 with the actual path to the image file that I want to use. So instead of cutting and pasting all of that template code in my actual source code, I'm just going to read it out of my project as a resource and then do a search and replace on it to fix it up. So that's now I've created a web part definition. Now I need to use the web part manager, which is a class in the client object model.
Well, see, now I think that's interesting because how many examples do you see out there for the client object model that actually let you know there's a limited web part manager that you can?
One right here.
There it is, right. So, you know, this is really showing you going beyond the simple types of stuff, which is mostly reading and writing to lists is what you see out there.
Which is what OData does, right? So. So once we create the manager, I can actually create a new web part in that manager, right? This is basically the same thing as going into SharePoint and adding a web part into SharePoint. And when I create the new web part, I'm going to import it using that template that we just created. And now I'm going to actually upload it to the page, but I have to tell it which zone to add the web part. In this case, it's the hidden zone, and it's called WPZ, which is the name of the hidden zone on the wiki pages. And so this is interesting because again, none of this is really documented very well.
So the WPZ, that's like magic. That's the
right.
magic.
You just have to know
it's
that,
the
right?
secret decoder ring part.
This is the price of the emission here, right? And so once I do that, I now can upload that, and the web part zone is in there, right? Okay, so the next thing I need to do is I need to actually fix up the text that goes into the wiki field. And so here I have another template. And this is the text that goes inside that wiki field. So if you looked at your wiki pages in SharePoint Designer, you would see this text inside the wiki field. And this thing is, you can see in the middle where it says class equals RTE layout zone inner. That's where you actually stick the HTML that is your wiki page. All the other stuff is just kind of plumbing around the wiki page. It's not really important. And so what I'm doing here is I also need to pass in the GUID for this page. So I need to put that in a couple places. So I have some replacement variables for that. That's what we do here. So I take that, put in a GUID for that page, and then I stick that on the wiki field. So now I'm getting closer and closer to having a valid, empty wiki page, right? So it's all in client side. So then we do that. We upload, create the page, create the web part, and now we're ready to actually insert the wiki, the web part into the wiki text. And this is the last step. And so the wiki text looks like this. So this is the web part reference inside of your wiki page. So every web part you add to your wiki page, this is how you reference it, right? This is what SharePoint then takes a reference to this and inserts the actual thing on render. And so what we need to do is we need to stick in the GUID for the wiki. We need to stick in the GUID for the web part in the hidden web part zone inside of this reference.
Nothing to it. Talk about baking cookies.
Whew, this must be chocolate chip. So once we do that, you can see here, I'm basically just taking that div tag, looking for the inner zone, and then sticking that the web part reference inside that inner zone. So what we do is we then stick it in that inner zone. I now update the wiki field with the new wiki text, which contains the web part zone, and then we update the page, and we're done. And so that's it, right? I mean, but this code is boilerplate. Once you take this code, write it once, it works for all your wiki pages. Yeah. There's not a lot of stuff you have to change.
So as I'm fond of saying, it's painful, but it's the same pain all the time, right?
Right. So just cut and paste, right?
Once you know how to do it, you're in good shape.
So again, the client object model can do a lot more things besides just data. It does all the data that you can do in OData and all that sort of stuff, but you can do a lot of really powerful things with web parts, wiki pages, zones, writing to the menu. You can see other things up here, such as we've also dynamically added, menu items to the ribbon on the fly, and so all of that stuff can occur right from the client using the client object model. Question in the back? I'm sorry, can you?
I think he asked you if you could enumerate web part zones. Is that what you did? He's nodding. Can you enumerate web part zones with the client object model?
I believe you can. So the question is, can you enumerate web part zones? And I believe you can because you have to specify. I believe the answer is yes, but see me offline and I'll look the code up for you. But I'm pretty sure you can.
All right, cool. So, just kind of stepping back for a second, right? The whole point of this session is to give you a bunch of patterns and techniques that you can take home with you. So it kind of all comes at you, this is a bit of a fire hose thing, right? So you're sitting there and you're getting an awful lot of information all at once. I feel like we kind of need like a 7th inning stretch or something to move on. But all right, so here at sort of the intermission point. Ready to do something new, right?
Wait, just a second.
One more?
Does anybody need to get a picture of this before we go?
Oh, yeah. I know I'm going to see that later. I suppose if that's the worst photo that comes from my tech head experience that makes it to the internet, I'd be all right. All right, man. All right, so let's press on. Okay, so the next one I'm going to show you is a little bit simpler technique, so we give you a little bit of mental break after that long one right there. But here's what we're doing. Let's take a look at this little picture library I've got here. So I've got a picture library, nothing special, standard picture library, and I've put in some pictures of Atlanta. Seems appropriate. And then if I come to my Silverlight solution, I'll show you a Silverlight solution that just plays these images now just in like a slideshow. And there's nothing really special about what's happening here. This is just basic slideshow running inside of Silverlight. What's important about this demonstration is how the information about the picture collection got to Silverlight so that it could be played. And so basically what we're doing is we're taking the information about these images and we're actually embedding it directly in the web page. So we don't have to go back to the server to find out what the next picture is. And if we come in here and just do a right click on this page and just do a view source, we can bring up the actual source for the page. Let's go ahead and bump it up a little bit. Yeah, maybe one more will do. Okay. And then if I just come in here and do a quick search for Atlanta, you can see that the actual image names are embedded directly inside of the web page itself. And so what's happening here is that this information is being kept inside of a hidden field. So if you look at the input tag up here, there's the input tag, there's the name, that's pretty important to us, we'll see later. But the type is hidden. So in the value, I'm just burying a bunch of information I might care about. Now, we're using this technique to rotate a bunch of images inside of Silverlight, but you can use this to pass any kind of information that you want to have on the client side and have your Silverlight application have access to without having to go back to the server. And the way that this gets passed into the Silverlight application is through the init params. So if we do a search here and we just do init params, we'll find the actual definition down here.
And this is a great technique that's useful for building Silverlight navigation menus using the built-in SharePoint navigation objects, where you can generate all the navigation items when the server renders, and then Silverlight has that for the navigation.
Yeah, so in this case you can see that we have this init params, and then what are we passing into it? The input control ID. So the hook here is that once you bury the data that you're interested in inside the web page, then you pass the ID of the hidden field into the Silverlight application so that it can find the data inside the web page that's hosting it. Okay, let's see how it works. Let's jump back over to code here. And we got a couple of places to stop along the way and see what's going on. The first is just to take a look at the actual classes that we're putting together to handle the data. So essentially what you do in order to make this technique work is you're going to have to package up all the data and then serialize that data and bury it inside of the web page. So you can see, for example, here at the top, I've got references to serialization namespace, and in particular the JSON namespace here, which is where the serializer is that we're going to be making use of. And then you'll also see that I have a simple class here called picture, and the picture has a title and a URL, and this is the information that I want to be able to put inside of the web page. For each of the members of that class, in this case title and URL, you can see I've decorated it with the data member attribute. And if we scroll down a little bit, you'll see that we also have a picture list. So not only do I have a class that represents an individual picture, but also a picture list that we can also serialize with the data contract and the data member elements there. And then the next key place to stop here is in the serialize method. So this code right here with the data contract JSON serializer, that's actually the real class name. It doesn't win the award for the longest class name. I've seen longer ones in business connectivity services, but that's right up there on one of the longest class names in the framework. So what's going on here is just this code right here. This actually serializes all of that data, and again, that's so that we can take it and write it into the web page and deliver it. Okay, so the next thing we need to do then is we need to gather up our collection of pictures. And so here, you can see that we're writing some pretty simple, pretty straightforward code here that goes ahead and goes into the site and the web, and it goes looking for the picture library where we've saved our pictures of Atlanta. And in the configuration for this, we simply say what the name of the library is that we want to look at. So this all you got to really do once you get this code is pretty much drop it on the page and tell it where your picture library is, and it just works. Okay, so this is all pretty straightforward code that SharePoint guys write all the time, so no sweat there. But then what we do is we run that serialize method. So here I am coming back with the serialize method, And then I'm taking the input control, which is my hidden control, and into the value of that hidden control, writing that big serialized piece of data. And this is really the crux of the technique, which is to take that serialized data and put it in there. And now it's just going to be buried inside the web page, and we're going to be able to use our Silverlight application to read that data back out. Okay, so the next thing is to set the init params on our Silverlight plugin. So after we do our serialization, then the next thing that we've got to do is go ahead and set that init params. Remember that what's in the init params is the ID of the input control that we care about, because it's at runtime that we're going to go ahead and find that hidden control. And this is just using the client ID property of the input control, and the client ID property returns to you what the ID of that control will be at runtime. So you see how it's all fallen together? Just put it in the hidden field, figure out what the name of the thing is going to be at runtime, and then put it into the init params. And that's all we have to do to set this up. Now the next thing you need to do is actually see how that works inside of your Silverlight application. So init params, if you haven't done a lot of work with init params in Silverlight, it's a very powerful idea where you can take some data and pass it into your Silverlight application from the host. And so the understanding how that data gets read is pretty critical, because it's something you'll do over and over again. And the way that it gets read is you can see that I'm in the app.xaml CS here, and then I'm in the application startup event. So this is the code that's going to run when the Silverlight application starts up. And when this code runs, what we can do is look at the init params collection and then specify the name of the init param that we care about, because we can pass in multiple parameters that will all be semicolon delimited along the way. And then we'll get our value back out, and now we've read it. So at this point, then, what happens is the data's in the hidden field, and the Silverlight application knows the ID of the hidden field that has all that data inside of it. Finally, we actually have to read that data back out again. And so the way that we're going to do that, I'm in my main page XAML now, which is the main part of the Silverlight application. And in the main part of the Silverlight application, we're simply using the HTML document class, which is just using the DOM to find that hidden field. So Silverlight itself can look at the DOM from the application, and all we're going to do is go in there and look at that input control ID and retrieve the value. So now all of that serialized information that we had buried inside of the hidden field comes back to us as a JSON string. And then I can rebuild my picture list by calling this load method with this JSON string. And now I basically have my list of images that I need to show, and I can go ahead and rotating that images.
And this is the same technique that you saw me do in the first example, where when I clicked on the name, it showed it in HTML. This is what we refer to as the HTML bridge, or when you call HTML document to get that. And it's the same technique whether I'm reading stuff out of the page, or in my case, on the first example, we write stuff into the page. This is the same way that you would do that technique.
Yeah, this is a pretty powerful technique, and it's not one that I really see used a lot. I mean, there's lots of times I think in Silverlight applications where it'd be very handy to bury some data in the page. And again, one of the themes that we've been hitting on over and over again is don't make a lot of calls back to the server, minimize the amount of data, and this is just another way to do that exact thing so that you can build solutions that, that aren't too chatty. Okay.
That was good.
Yeah, let's press on and look at another one. So the next thing that we're going to talk about, the next technique to talk about, is using web services inside of Silverlight applications. So, in 2007, SharePoint 2007, we had web services that people used an awful lot to do client-side things, right? And then one of the big things the customers wanted when we moved to 2010 was they said, hey, give us more web services, right? Because if you think about this, right, think about the family of all things you could do with the server-side API. And I think it's fair to say that if you think about all the things you could do with the server-side API, it's pretty much 100% of what you could do in the browser, right? So if I could do it in the browser, I could write some server-side code that's going to do that. But if you run yourself back to SharePoint 2007 and you say, what percentage of all the things I could do in the browser could I do with web services? I don't know.
50.
50? I think it's generous. Okay. But it wasn't 100.
45.
45. All right, so we'll go with 45. I usually draw a smaller block when I'm talking about it. But the point is, right, that we had some web services like the list data, like our list web service that we could use, and they were pretty popular, and people said, hey, give us more. Well, in response to that, what we got, instead of a bunch of new web services, we got the client object model.
And OData.
And OData, right? So all those that we've been talking about are great additions, but still, there might be times when we want to go use web services. And for example, not everything is available to us through the client object model or OData. In particular, some of the more advanced capabilities of SharePoint, like enterprise search or profiling information, isn't really part of the client object model, right? So we still have needs to be able to get to that stuff. So we find ourselves going back to the old ASMX web services to make that happen. So what we'll do now is let's take a look at an example of using some of those old ASMX web services to get things to happen.
And so I think the important takeaway is that there's no one solution that's going to get you all the way there for what you want to do, right?
Yeah, and I think that's really, you know, what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to give you a toolkit of things that you can use depending upon what you're trying to accomplish. And certainly, you know, these are things I hear all the time on the forums that problems people are trying to solve. Okay, so here's a Silverlight application here that's using the search web service. So I can just come in here, this is going to be pretty straightforward, and I can type, well, let's do wingtip. So we'll type in wingtip, and then I can go ahead and do a search. It runs a search for me, and sure enough, you know, brings back a bunch of hits, great, so we can see all the different things that are here.
Now that actually went out and called the SharePoint SOAP ASMX service?
Right. So the key thing here about the understanding is that, you know, the Silverlight app is running on the client. So it's calling the search ASMX service in order to issue this request, run the enterprise search engine, and get a result back. And again, we can't do that through OData or the client object model, right? We need some other way to do it. So this is still something that's valid and important. Now, before we look at the details of that, I'll show you a couple of other cool things about this. I actually really like this. I think Bob did a great job on this particular web part, and I can see people going and getting it, maybe not even for the code, but just because it's pretty cool.
Right.
So you can come in here to this web part, and you can say, you know, let's go ahead and edit it, just like we would any web part, put it in edit mode. And now it does this really cool thing where the interface on the, you know, on the Silverlight application changes. Yeah. And now it's offering you configuration options here inside Silverlight.
Well, I think, you know, normally you see on the right side there you have the little strip where you edit the properties of the web part. But
yeah, and you can see it right over here where it basically now says, please edit them over on the other side.
Right, and I think this is a beautiful technique for expanding the configuration surface that your user can use. Imagine they had to configure their home address instead of having them type it in a little box. You could actually put a Bing map on the back of your page, so to speak, and let them pick an address, right?
Yeah, this rocks. I mean, can you imagine trying to take this UI that we have here for configuration and put it up here in the top part of the property pane?
Right.
I mean, crazy. You couldn't pull it off, right? So this is really a nice approach and something I haven't seen anybody else really doing either. Yeah. But again, you know, this is a pretty functional thing. So what we can do is come in here instead of saying, let's run a search. Let's switch from looking for items to looking for people. And then I'm going to go ahead and do alphabetic sort, and we'll do alphabetic tabs. So the other thing I really like about this is, you know, when someone does a people search in SharePoint,
right,
they always seem to miss the fact that SharePoint search sorts by relevance, right? So if I type in Stubbs or I type in Paul,
I always come to the top.
Yeah, the most relevant to the top, exactly right. And then people wonder, why aren't they sorted alphabetically? And it's because the search engine decided the Paul you really wanted was Paul Stubbs, so it pushed him to the top, right? But this thing allows you to sort of override that, and we can do alpha stuff. And I'll say I want to see 5 people at a time. That should be good. Come over here and click OK. And now we get a view of the web part that you know, a lot of organizations want. This is that phone book interface, so we can just come up here and start clicking on letters, and you know, there's the A's and the B's and the C's, and that's pretty nice. Nice job with the styling, all that. I don't have a lot of good images on here. I should take that picture you just took of me.
There you go.
I put it up here as my profile.
And all this code is, again, we'll have a link at the end, so you'll be able to download all of this code.
Yeah, and like I say, you know, you kind of look at this and go, gee, I just take that and bring it back to my shop, because that's pretty good stuff. Yeah. And then if you click on any individual person, it brings up this individual record for them, which is pretty sweet. And it shows you all their recent activities over here, which is a separate ASMX web service. And then I can also do like a, you know, a little tweet right here, and I can say, you know, having.
And this is using the SharePoint activity feeds and other information
11.
To pull that back using the profile services inside of SharePoint.
Yeah, so we'll say having fun at Tech Ed 11 and do a send note. And then it sends that off as, you know, as my little tweet shows up in my little bubble when you go look at my profile. And it'll take a while for that to happen. It's not instantaneous. Oh, uh-oh. Uh-oh. Uh-oh, we're good. Hang on. Let me go down in a hurry here. Let's see if I can get this done.
So I think in this case, we're using search service. We're using the profile services to bring that back. We see the techniques around using the backside of the page for configuration. And so these examples really do pack a lot of kind of different techniques into one. Some of them are a little contrived, but hopefully you gain the value of seeing the breadth of solutions and how to try different things.
All right, cool. So let's go take a look at how that was done. And into the web services, let's see, we'll go with this one's the one I want first. Okay, so first thing here is to just look at the service references. So these are the service references that I'm making use of. Again, these are, you know, typically services that aren't supported by one of the other things that we've talked about. So you can see that I've got a reference to the search. I've got a reference to the social service here, which is what's giving me the activity feeds we were just looking at. And then there's user profile, which is what's bringing up the profile information as well. Now, one of the interesting things about using these old ASMX services with Silverlight is that, you know, I had this experience before I really understood the basic problem. I had this experience where I would be writing Silverlight applications, excuse me, against old ASMX web services, and sometimes they would work, and then sometimes they wouldn't.
Right.
Right? And actually, before I kind of understood what was going on, I remember I went in and by hand I changed the contract.
Right.
And I changed everything to strings because strings were working and other stuff wasn't.
Right.
Right? So there's this problem with Silverlight and old ASMX web services where the contract that gets created isn't always right. There's kind of, I don't know, it's not really corrupted. It's just kind of wrong for what? In particular, GUIDs and cars, right?
Right.
Char character stuff. And so what we need to do then is we have a kind of a solution that allows us to add a behavior that sort of fixes up that contract to make it work. So this is something you're going to want to really be concerned about if you're going against any old ASMX web services. You could certainly run into this at any time.
Yeah, and the behavior is kind of this loosely coupled way to add an event onto the contract so that when it runs, you can have an opportunity to kind of fix it up here.
Yeah, so basically, I mean, there's not a lot of reason for us to worry about digging through the code for this, but basically what we have is a behavior that was created by one of the guys on the Silverlight team designed to clean up the message contracts that are created between these old ASMX services and your Silverlight application. Here in the code itself, you can see where it's available from. So we've just got that right there in the code, so you can go ahead and grab this behavior. But the real thing that you care about as a Silverlight developer using these old ASMX web services is how do I make this thing work? Okay.
And that technique will save you a ton of time and hair pulling to...
Oh, I'm telling you, I'm missing hair right back here from the very first time I went through this.
Yeah.
Yep.
Question, yeah.
The question is, does old ASMX mean SharePoint 2007? Well, I just mean, ASMX Web Services as opposed to WCF Web Services. So it might be the ASMX Web Services that SharePoint surfaces, but it could certainly be the ASMX Web Services that, you wrote dozens of back when we told you that it was all supposed to be SOA. So you bravely went out and wrote all those ASMX Web Services, and now we're telling you to use Silverlight. And you connect to those things, and suddenly it's just kind of not working right. Like the data's corrupt and I'm throwing errors around. And that's kind of what you'll experience. Okay, so the key thing, though, is how this gets done. So what we're looking at here in this code, this is just a section of the code where we're requesting the profile information. So we're calling that profile web service. And here you can see, basic HTTP binding that I've got set up, and an endpoint address right there that's pointing to the profile endpoint address. All that stuff looks good. And then I go in here and I make myself a new client. So we've got the user profile service SOAP client. And this is all pretty straightforward, right? WCF style coding that we're doing here, where we're setting this up with the binding and the endpoint. And then we've got an event here that's going to fire when we're complete. All that stuff looks good. There's nothing really new inside of that. The key thing is this line of code right here, where we go into that client and we add the new behavior. So what happens when you add this new behavior is it just gets in the pipeline and it cleans up all the contract, it cleans up all that data conversion and contract interface, so that when a GUID comes across, it doesn't give you a runtime error. When a char value comes across, it doesn't give you a runtime error. So it's really simple to use. You don't have to dig into the ASMX behavior itself, but this one line of code will just save you all kinds of heartache.
Yep.
Okay, other things to take a look at in this particular web part is the property map itself. So one of the things that we do when we go off to, say, the profile web service is we get back a bunch of information about somebody, right? So you can probably see in your mind's eye, if you think about a profile, it's got all kinds of different fields. And maybe I don't want all those fields. And the other thing is that a lot of those fields that come back, they don't really have user-friendly names. They've got whatever naming is being used by the service itself. So for example, you can see like SPS-location and SPS-status notes. Probably not the way I want to present that information to an end user. So what we've got here is a dictionary that allows us to take the fields as they appear inside that service and then transform them essentially into something nicer for display. So this is just mapping the properties into something that's better for display. And this is more than just sort of a passing thing to look at. This is really an important idea about creating your Silverlight applications in a way that separates the UI from the functionality underneath, right? So this solution uses the WVVM pattern, which means that we should be able to work with test data inside of
Expression Blend.
Thank you, Expression Blend. And you should be able to work with test data inside of Expression Blend and have that separate from a lot of the functionality that's being written inside of Visual Studio. So again, that's the takeaway there is it's this idea of really separating the display from the functionality, which gives you a big plus in Silverlight as well.
Right, and that technique is really important because it allows you to let designers go design and do the stuff they're good at, and let SharePoint developers and Silverlight developers do the stuff that they're good at, and they can work together using sample data in a loosely coupled fashion with MVVM and Expression Blend.
Yep, very cool. So if you're not doing MVVM pattern development in Silverlight, it's something you kind of want to put on your reading list and say, let me go figure out what that is and why I should care about it.
Right.
Okay, next place to stop is on the activity feed itself. So here we're in this method called request activity feed right here. And what's important about this code right here is that oftentimes, instead of going against web services, you may also want to go against feeds.
Right.
And so if you go in against feeds, you can see that's done very simply by just using a web client class. So the web client class will just simply accept a URL that you want to go to. And you know, it's sort of like having your own little mini browser in 3 lines of code. You can just go grab stuff that you want, and then you get the data and you can do what you want with it. And in this case, what we're getting back is a feed. So along with this idea of being able to use the web client in the Silverlight class to, you know, to reach out to a feed, also make note of this class, the syndication feed class, So lots of times in samples where the web client is used, somebody will run off to a service and they'll get some data, and then they go through some arduous parsing process to actually find what they want. And in our case, we don't need to worry about that because the syndication feed class does all of the heavy lifting for us. So that's just a good thing to take away if you're working with feeds. Pretty easy. You can see how few lines of code it is to do a web client and then a syndication feed class. Okay, good. So, so that's this web part here. And I'm looking at 4 minutes left on our clock, so maybe we should kind of wrap up here.
And I think what's really great about this, if we switch back to slides here, is that you've seen how to do OData access, you've seen how to do client object model, you've seen how to read and write data, you've seen how to upload documents and create wiki pages and web parts, you've seen how to access HTML on the page to read and write HTML on the page, you've seen how to use RSS feeds and web services. And all of these techniques you'll be using within your application, and it becomes very common, and following these patterns makes it trivial to do these things. And so with that, the code is here if you go to code.msdn.com/SPSL. And also if you are a member of the Safari Books Online, they also do the book as we're writing it. They actually publish the book chapters the second we turn them in with all the bad spelling and grammar. They just publish it out there. So you can, in essence, read the book as we write it. But the book will be out probably in a couple months if you want to wait for the hard copy. But the code, all the code that we wrote in all the chapters is there now. So download that and go look at that. I have another book that's came out in December. Just mentioned this in passing. It's doing branding, so to make your SharePoint sites not look like SharePoint, which is the goal of everybody. It's a great book. Show you how to do master pages, branding, theming, CSS, and so on and so forth. I believe this is downstairs at the bookstore as well. So.
All right. And these are all the books that I either wrote, co-wrote, or was heavily involved with for 2010. I don't know what I was thinking.
Scott is a writing machine.
I don't know what I was thinking. So 4 books and a DVD just to make it that much more difficult. I think
this one, though, my personal favorite is the BCS one, because BCS is a huge part of SharePoint, and this book is, you know, I don't get paid for this, but this book is actually is the best BCS book around, and really, if you're doing anything with BCS, this is a must-have.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it's definitely an area that I spent a lot of time in. All right, let's see what else we got. We got some other resources we need to put up here.
I think one more, they have the tag where they can win valuable prizes.
Is this the guy we need right here?
And impress their friends, yeah.
Okay, so we gotta leave that up.
But with that, you know, we hope you enjoyed this. We tried to make this fun. I know it's the last session of the day. Hopefully you've learned some new techniques. If you have questions, come up and ask us some questions. And with that, please fill out your evals and leave comments. We'd love to hear from you, and thank you very much.